The ship was perfectly repaired, until the alien queen saw it was a human S-work. In the far reaches of space, amidst the cold, dark expanse of the universe, a massive warship drifted slowly toward the outer rim. The ship was called Valkyrie, a symbol of power, strength, and unity. It was designed to be an unbeatable weapon, constructed by the greatest minds of the alien species that formed the United Fleet, a coalition of diverse beings who had long since conquered their own planets and united under a single banner. The Valkyrie was their pride, and it was meant to defend their way of life. But now it was broken. The Valkyrie had been the target of a brutal surprise attack by a race of fierce, unknown invaders. Its hull was scarred, its engines were offline, and its weapons were completely disabled. The ship, once the symbol of alien might, now limped through space, a hollow shell, crippled and vulnerable. The fleet's command sent out an urgent distress call, and the message was received by every ally in range. The only help that came, however, was not from another fleet or a powerful alien force. It was a human, one solitary human who was part of the repair team on the Valkyrie. Captain Naomi Hayes, a seasoned mechanic and engineer, had been stationed on the Valkyrie for several months before the attack. She was one of the few humans in the coalition, a species considered to be primitive and insignificant by most of the other species in the fleet. Yet Naomi had earned the respect of the crew for her technical prowess and problem-solving skills. She had fixed machines, engines, and systems on countless occasions during her time aboard. She had no illusions about her status. Humans were still seen as weak and unimportant in the grand scheme of things. But in this moment, she was the only one who could save the ship. Naomi had been working in the engine room when the attack happened. The blast had torn through the ship's outer defenses, and the sudden explosion had knocked her unconscious. When she came to, the ship was already listing, drifting slowly into the depths of space, and chaos had erupted all around her. She had seen many crew members injured or dead, and the rest were trying to stabilize the ship's failing systems. The Valkyrie was on the verge of destruction, and no one knew how to repair it in time. At first, Naomi had been hesitant to step forward. She knew how the alien crews felt about humans, how they viewed their technology as far superior to anything human hands could craft. But desperation had set in. There was no time to wait for reinforcements, no time to send out more distress calls. Naomi decided to take charge of the repair efforts. Naomi entered the central command room where the alien leaders were gathered. Torak, the chief engineer of the fleet, was overseeing the operation. He was a large creature, towering and imposing, with chitinous armor covering his body. His species, the Zorath, was one of the oldest and most advanced of the alien races. He looked down at Naomi with a mixture of disdain and curiosity. "What is this, human?" Torak's voice was deep and gravelly, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed Naomi. "You're suggesting you can help repair the Valkyrie?" Naomi stood tall, despite the intimidating presence of the alien engineers. She didn't flinch. "Yes," she said firmly. "I've worked on this ship before. I know how it works, and I know how to fix it." There was a long pause as the other engineers looked at each other, exchanging glances. They seemed skeptical, but they said nothing. The situation was dire, and they were running out of options. Torak studied Naomi for a moment longer, then sighed. "Very well, you may begin, but know this, your race is not capable of creating what we need. Don't waste our time." Naomi didn't respond. Instead, she turned and walked toward the ship's engine bay. She had no intention of wasting anyone's time. She had her plan, and she would see it through. The ship's engines were a mess. The core reactor had been damaged in the attack, and the power distribution systems were barely functional. Naomi immediately set to work, scanning the systems and analyzing the damage. The alien technology was advanced, but Naomi had worked with complex systems before. She wasn't intimidated by the unfamiliar designs. Her human ingenuity had always been her greatest strength. Over the next few hours, Naomi worked tirelessly. She used her tools to bypass damaged circuits, rerouted power, and recalibrated the reactors. The alien engineers hovered around her, offering unsolicited advice and criticism, but Naomi ignored them. She had no time for their condescension. Every minute mattered. As she worked, the ship slowly began to come back to life. The lights flickered back on, and the hum of the engines started to return. Naomi's methods were unorthodox, but they were effective. She didn't follow the standard procedures that the aliens would have used. Instead, she made use of every available resource, improvising with parts and materials that were readily available on the ship. When Torak came to inspect her work, he didn't hide his surprise. The power levels were stable again and the life support systems were functional. The ship was showing signs of recovery, something he had not expected from a human. "I don't know how you did it, human," Torak muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "But it seems you've managed to bring the ship back from the brink." Naomi didn't respond. She simply continued working, knowing that there was still much more to do. As the days went by, Naomi's repairs made more and more progress. The Valkyrie's weapon systems were coming online, and the hyperdrive was functioning again. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to give the fleet a fighting chance. Despite her success, Naomi knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The Queen of the Fleet, Queen Malrath, was coming to inspect the ship. She was the supreme ruler of the United Fleet, and her word was law. She had little patience for imperfection, and she was known to be harsh on those who failed her. Naomi couldn't afford to make any mistakes, not with the fate of the fleet hanging in the balance. Queen Malrath's arrival was met with a mixture of excitement and fear. The alien engineers prepared the ship for her inspection, and Torak himself stood at attention, ready to offer his report. Naomi, on the other hand, simply continued with her repairs, trying not to think about the confrontation that was coming. The Queen's arrival was as grand and imposing as Naomi had expected. She entered the command room with a procession of guards, her regal presence filling the space. Her species, the Elkai, was known for its beauty and elegance, but also for its deadly precision. She was a being of great power, and her judgment was swift and final. Naomi watched as the Queen surveyed the ship, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She moved with purpose, her long, flowing robes shimmering in the light. Her attendants followed behind, whispering in low voices. When Queen Malrath reached Naomi, she paused and stared at the human woman for a long moment. Naomi held her gaze, refusing to look away. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the weight of the impending judgment. Finally, the Queen spoke. "Human," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "I have heard of your repairs, but I must see for myself if your kind can truly fix what we have built." Naomi nodded. "I've done everything I can to restore the Valkyrie. It may not be perfect, but it's ready to fight." The Queen raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. "We shall see." She stepped forward, inspecting the ship with the eyes of a ruler who had seen everything. Naomi could only stand there, waiting for the verdict. Would the Queen accept her work, or would it be dismissed because of her human hands? The fate of the Valkyrie and of Naomi herself now rested in the Queen's judgment. And as the tension grew, Naomi knew that this was just the beginning. The true test was yet to come. The Queen stood silently before Naomi, her eyes scanning the repaired systems of the Valkyrie. The air was thick with tension as every engineer and officer in the room held their breath, waiting for the Queen's verdict. Naomi stood tall, her hands slightly trembling from the constant strain of her work, but her resolve was strong. This was her moment to prove that humanity could be just as capable as any of the advanced species that made up the United Fleet. Queen Malrath's gaze lingered on Naomi for what felt like an eternity. Naomi could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to look away. She had worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of energy into repairing the ship, knowing the fate of not just the Valkyrie, but the entire fleet rested on the success of her efforts. The Queen's judgment would determine if her work would be accepted or cast aside. Finally, the Queen spoke, her voice cold and commanding. "You claim this ship is ready for battle, human?" Her tone was measured, but there was a hint of disbelief in it. "How can you, with your primitive methods, accomplish what generations of the most advanced species in the galaxy could not?" Naomi didn't flinch at the Queen's words. Instead, she stood tall and met the Queen's gaze directly. "Yes," Naomi said firmly. "I claim that the Valkyrie is ready. I've repaired its systems and brought it back online using everything I had at my disposal. It may not be the same as your people would have done, but it's functional and it works." The room fell silent again. Naomi felt every eye on her, the alien engineers watching her every move, waiting for her to fail. Torak, who had been standing off to the side, looked unimpressed, but Naomi knew better than to take his disdain to heart. She had already proven herself capable in ways that no one else had. Queen Malrath slowly walked around the ship's command deck, inspecting every corner, every system. Naomi kept her composure, refusing to show any signs of weakness. The ship was her pride, her work, and it was her only hope of earning the respect of the Queen and the other alien engineers. Every piece of machinery, every wire, every circuit was her creation now, and she would not let it be dismissed. As the Queen moved through the ship, Naomi noticed a slight change in her demeanor. The Queen's steps became more deliberate, her sharp eyes taking in the subtle details that had been restored. There was something about Naomi's work that had caught her attention, something she had not expected. The repairs were unconventional, true, but they were effective. The Queen stopped in front of one of the ship's control panels. She studied it carefully, running her fingers across the interface, her expression unreadable. Naomi felt her breath catch in her throat. Would she accept the repairs, or would she demand they be undone? Finally, Queen Malrath turned to Naomi. "You have done the impossible, human," she said, her voice still cold but with a hint of respect. "These repairs are impressive. Your people may be primitive in some ways, but there is something to be said for your ability to adapt, to think outside the box." Naomi let out a quiet sigh of relief, but she didn't allow herself to show any outward signs of emotion. She had expected criticism, but the Queen's words, though brief, were an acknowledgement that her work had not gone unnoticed. The Queen paused, as if considering her next words carefully. "But this ship is not just a weapon. It is a symbol of our unity, of the advanced species that make up the United Fleet. It is the heart of our military, and it must remain worthy of that role. You must understand the importance of preserving the integrity of our technology." Naomi nodded, her mind racing. "I understand, Your Majesty. I've only made the repairs necessary to restore the ship. The core systems, the engines, the weapons, they are functional now. The ship is ready to fight again, as it was intended." The Queen regarded Naomi for a long moment. Naomi could feel the weight of the Queen's gaze, but she didn't back down. The Valkyrie was ready, and she was ready to defend her work. Queen Malrath finally spoke, her voice softer than before. "I will allow the Valkyrie to remain in service. You have earned your place in this fleet, human, but know this: if your repairs fail, it will be your failure, and there will be no second chances." Naomi's heart skipped a beat, but she nodded. "Understood, Your Majesty." With that, the Queen turned and left the room, her attendants following closely behind her. The engineers exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. Naomi couldn't help but feel a surge of pride, but she knew that the battle wasn't over. The Valkyrie might have been repaired, but now it had to perform. She had to prove herself once more, not just to the Queen, but to every single one of the alien engineers who still looked at her with skepticism. The days that followed were filled with more repairs and tests as Naomi and the alien engineers worked together to prepare the Valkyrie for the upcoming battle. Naomi had earned the Queen's approval, but that approval was fragile. The ship had to prove itself in combat. The fleet was preparing for a confrontation with an enemy fleet that had been lurking on the edge of their territory for weeks. The Valkyrie was to be the flagship of the fleet, leading the charge. Naomi's repairs would be tested in the heat of battle, and if the ship failed, she would bear the blame. The stakes had never been higher. Naomi worked day and night, overseeing every aspect of the ship's readiness. She coordinated with the alien engineers, making sure that every system was optimized for the upcoming conflict. The Valkyrie was a marvel of alien technology, and Naomi's human ingenuity had made it operational once again. But now she had to prove that it could withstand the pressures of real combat. The day of the battle arrived, and the fleet assembled in orbit around the target planet. The enemy fleet was larger and better armed, but the Valkyrie was their secret weapon. Naomi stood on the command deck, watching the massive warships of the fleet prepare for battle. The Valkyrie would be leading the charge, and she would be at the helm. As the fleet moved into position, Naomi felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. She had given everything to repair the ship, and now it was time to see if her work had paid off. She couldn't afford to fail, not now. The battle began with a thunderous clash as the fleets collided in space. Naomi watched the readouts on the command deck, her hands steady on the controls. The Valkyrie's weapon systems were fully operational, and Naomi was quick to issue commands as the ship fired its devastating energy cannons at the enemy fleet. The battle was fierce, but the Valkyrie held its ground. Naomi's repairs had worked. The ship was a force to be reckoned with, cutting through the enemy ranks with precision and power. Naomi's heart swelled with pride as the ship responded flawlessly to her commands. But the true test came when the enemy flagship, a massive warship twice the size of the Valkyrie, bore down on them. The Valkyrie was already damaged, and Naomi knew they couldn't take another direct hit. She had to make a daring move to take down the enemy flagship. With a quick flick of her fingers, Naomi altered the ship's course, guiding it toward the heart of the enemy fleet. The Valkyrie fired its remaining energy blasts, blasting through the shields of the enemy flagship, and with one final shot, it went down in a spectacular explosion. The battle ended in victory, and Naomi's repairs had proven themselves in the heat of combat. The Valkyrie had withstood the onslaught, and the enemy fleet was in full retreat. As the fleet celebrated their hard-earned victory, Naomi stood quietly on the command deck, watching the stars beyond. She had earned her place among the most advanced beings in the galaxy. She had proven that humanity's strength was not in their technology, but in their ability to adapt, to think, and to survive. The Valkyrie had been repaired. And Naomi Hayes had just changed the course of history. After the battle, Naomi stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, staring out into the vastness of space. The victory was theirs, but the journey was far from over. The crew had celebrated their success, but Naomi knew that their enemies were still out there. The war was far from finished, and the Valkyrie, despite its triumph, was still a symbol of humanity's place in the universe. A place that had been earned, not given. As the Valkyrie continued its journey through space, Naomi reflected on what she had accomplished. She had proven that humanity could stand alongside the most advanced species in the galaxy. But there was still so much more to do. The repair work on the ship had been only the beginning. Now, Naomi had to face the consequences of her success, both good and bad. Though Queen Malreth had acknowledged Naomi's work, there was still a sense of distrust among the other species. The aliens still saw humans as inferior, and Naomi knew that her actions had not completely erased the prejudice that existed. The respect she had earned was fragile, and she was keenly aware of that. Naomi had seen it in the eyes of the alien engineers and soldiers. They had been forced to recognize her skills, but that recognition was begrudging. It was the same with the Queen. While she had praised Naomi for her ingenuity, Naomi could see the Queen's underlying resentment. The Queen had allowed her to remain in the fleet, but Naomi knew she was still a human, still something lesser in the eyes of the fleet's leaders. The next few days were filled with strategy meetings and planning for future operations. Naomi spent most of her time overseeing the repairs and upgrades to the ship, ensuring that it was ready for any future battles. She had proven that the Valkyrie could be brought back to life, but there was no time to rest. The fleet was already preparing for the next assault, and Naomi was once again thrust into the center of it all. She was in the ship's engineering bay when Torak approached her. The Zorath engineer had become something of a reluctant ally since the battle, though his respect for Naomi was still clearly a work in progress. "Captain Hayes," Torak said, his voice deeper than usual. "The repairs are holding, but the weapons systems need further refinement. The battle we fought has shown us the weaknesses in our designs. I need your expertise." Naomi nodded. "I'll take a look at it, but we have to work quickly. The fleet's not waiting for us to catch up." Torak didn't respond right away. His gaze lingered on Naomi, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. For a long time, humans had been seen as expendable, barely capable of contributing to anything significant. Naomi had shattered that perception, but it seemed Torak, like many others, still wasn't entirely convinced that humanity belonged on the same stage as the more established species. "I'm not convinced your methods are appropriate," Torak said after a long pause. "But your results speak for themselves. We need to adapt. If you can fix the weapons systems like you fixed the engines, then I will concede that you have earned your place among us." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "I don't need your concession. I'll do what's necessary to win this war. If you're going to stand in my way, then I'll do it without you." Torak seemed taken aback by her bluntness but nodded. "We will see if your methods work. I trust you know what you're doing." The tension in the room was palpable. Naomi had made it clear that she didn't need anyone's approval, and Torak was forced to acknowledge that he needed her. That realization was a small victory for Naomi, but she knew it wasn't enough. She had to keep proving herself. Over the following days, Naomi worked tirelessly on the weapons systems. Her hands were stained with grease, her body exhausted from the constant strain of repairs, but she couldn't afford to slow down. Every time she fixed one problem, two more seemed to emerge. The Valkyrie had been badly damaged, and though the repairs had held up under the initial battle, it was clear that the ship would need constant attention if it was to survive the war. Naomi was in the midst of working on a critical weapons upgrade when she was called to the command deck. Queen Malrath had requested a meeting. Naomi was surprised. Since the battle, the queen had mostly kept to herself, issuing orders from afar and maintaining her distance. Naomi had been working under the assumption that the queen had moved on, but this meeting clearly indicated that something more was at stake. Naomi made her way to the command deck, her mind racing with possibilities. What did the queen want from her now? Had the respect she had earned truly been enough, or was there a new challenge waiting for her? When she arrived, Queen Malrath was standing by the large windows that overlooked the vastness of space. Her posture was regal as always, but there was something different in the way she carried herself now. There was a hint of uncertainty, something Naomi hadn't seen before. "Captain Hayes," the queen said, turning to face Naomi. "You have proven yourself to be useful to the fleet. The Valkyrie's performance in the battle was remarkable. I have reconsidered my stance on your people. You are not the weak species I once thought you to be." Naomi didn't say anything. She stood silently, waiting for the queen to continue. The words, while a step in the right direction, didn't mean much until the queen explained what she wanted from Naomi. The queen's eyes softened, and for the first time, Naomi saw something other than cold calculation. There was a flicker of respect, even admiration. "But there are those in the fleet who still view your kind with suspicion. Your methods are unconventional, and that has caused unease. I need to know that we can rely on you not just as a mechanic, but as a leader." Naomi was taken aback by the queen's request. Leadership was something she had never considered. She had always focused on the mechanics, the machines, the repairs. But now the queen was asking her to take on a new role, one that would require her to step out of the shadows and into the light. "I've never been a leader," Naomi said, her voice steady but unsure. "I fix things, I don't lead people." The queen nodded as if she had expected that answer. "Then let me ask you this. Can you command the Valkyrie in battle? Can you lead this ship and its crew to victory against the forces that threaten us all?" Naomi took a deep breath. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but in this moment she realized that there was no one else who could do it. She had earned the trust of the crew, and she had earned the queen's respect. It was time to step up. "I can do it," Naomi said, her voice clear and confident. "I'll lead the Valkyrie to victory." Queen Malrath smiled faintly. "Then the war is truly ours to win." Naomi felt the weight of the queen's words settle over her, but she didn't back down. She was ready. She had spent so long fixing the Valkyrie and proving her worth, but now the real challenge had begun. It was time for Naomi Hayes to take her place not just as a mechanic, but as a leader who would fight for the future of humanity and the United Fleet. The battle ahead would be unlike anything they had faced before. But Naomi was ready. The Valkyrie was ready, and together they would forge a path to victory. The Valkyrie had now been thrust into its most critical mission yet. Naomi stood at the command deck, feeling the weight of her new responsibility. The crew was counting on her, and the entire fleet was depending on the Valkyrie to lead the charge against the enemy. It was a war like no other. The stakes were higher than anything Naomi had ever faced. She had proven her worth as a mechanic, but now she was a leader, and that was a role she was still learning to embrace. The situation had changed since the victory in the last battle. The fleet was preparing for the next phase of the war, an all-out assault on the enemy's stronghold, a heavily fortified planet that was home to the invaders who had attacked the Valkyrie. The alien forces had regrouped, and intelligence reports indicated that they were preparing to strike back with everything they had. Naomi knew that this time, it wouldn't be enough to simply repair the ship and hope for the best. The battle ahead would be brutal, and the Valkyrie had to be at its best. Naomi paced the command deck, her mind racing. She had spent countless hours studying the ship's systems, working with the engineers to ensure that every component was in peak condition. But as the hours ticked by, she began to realize that it wasn't just the ship that needed to be in top form. It was the crew, too. They had been through a lot, and Naomi knew that the pressure would weigh heavily on them. She had to keep their spirits high, keep them focused on the mission ahead. She turned to face her crew, who were gathered around the command table. Torak stood beside her, his massive frame casting a shadow over the room. His presence was imposing, but Naomi had come to rely on him. Despite his early resistance, Torak had become an ally. He was a skilled engineer, and his knowledge of alien technology had been invaluable in helping to make the Valkyrie a formidable force once again. "Status update, Naomi," Torak said, his voice deep and steady. "The fleet is ready. The Valkyrie is prepped and operational. We're just waiting on your orders." Naomi nodded, her hands resting on the edge of the command table. "We're not just going into battle. This is going to be a decisive strike. We have to break the enemy's defenses, destroy their stronghold, and show them that we will never back down." Torak's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Naomi saw a flicker of something in them: respect. He had seen her work miracles with the ship, and now he saw the same determination in her as a leader. "Your command will be followed, Naomi," he said. "The fleet is ready." Naomi took a deep breath. It was time. "Let's do this." The order was given, and the fleet set course for the enemy stronghold. As the Valkyrie moved through space, Naomi stood at the helm, her mind focused on the task at hand. She had always been a fixer, a problem solver, but now she was the one making the decisions that would determine the outcome of this battle. She felt the weight of it, but she knew she couldn't falter. The crew needed her, the fleet needed her, and humanity needed her. As the fleet neared the enemy planet, Naomi's thoughts turned to the challenges ahead. The enemy's defenses were formidable, their ships and technology advanced. But Naomi had something they didn't: human adaptability. It was the one thing that had always set humanity apart. When faced with a problem, humans found a way to solve it, even when the odds were stacked against them. And Naomi was no different. She had learned to think on her feet, to improvise and innovate when the situation demanded it. The Valkyrie's repairs had been unconventional, but they had worked. Now she would do the same with the battle strategy. The enemy fleet appeared on the scanners, massive warships bristling with weapons, their shields glowing ominously. Naomi's heart raced, but her mind remained clear. This was it. The time for doubt was over. The Valkyrie was ready, and so was she. "All hands prepare for battle," Naomi called out. "We are going in fast. Our goal is to cripple their fleet and destroy their stronghold. Stay sharp, stay focused, and we'll win this together." The crew responded with a chorus of affirmations. Naomi took her seat at the command console, her hands moving with practiced precision. She activated the fleet-wide communication system, transmitting the orders to all ships. "All ships follow my lead. We're going in full throttle. Engage enemy forces with everything we've got." The Valkyrie surged forward, its engines roaring to life as it entered the fray. Naomi could feel the power beneath her feet as the ship blasted through space at full speed. The enemy fleet opened fire, their weapons lighting up the darkness, but Naomi was ready. She maneuvered the Valkyrie with expert precision, dodging incoming blasts and returning fire with devastating force. The battle was intense. The Valkyrie's weapons systems, which Naomi had personally overseen, worked flawlessly. The energy cannons fired in rapid succession, cutting through enemy ships like a hot knife through butter. Naomi's mind was focused on the strategy, taking out key targets, neutralizing the enemy's defenses, and making sure the fleet followed her lead. Torak's voice came over the comms. "The enemy fleet is retreating. We've broken their lines." But Naomi wasn't satisfied. The enemy's flagship remained, a towering behemoth that had yet to fall. Naomi knew that as long as it was still in play, the battle was not won. She locked her eyes on the target, calculating the best course of action. "Prepare for a direct assault on the flagship," Naomi ordered. "All ships, focus your fire on their shields. We'll take them down from the inside." The Valkyrie charged forward, its weapons blasting away at the flagship's defenses. Naomi felt the ship shake as enemy fire pounded against the hull, but she held her course, determined to finish what they had started. With a final, powerful strike, the enemy flagship's shields collapsed, and Naomi ordered the fleet to concentrate their fire on its core. The flagship erupted in a fiery explosion, sending debris scattering into space. The enemy fleet, now leaderless and crippled, scattered and retreated. Naomi's heart pounded in her chest, but the job wasn't over yet. She had to secure the final objective, the enemy's stronghold on the planet below. "We're not done yet," Naomi said, her voice steady. "Prepare for ground assault. We'll make sure they never threaten us again." The Valkyrie descended toward the planet's surface, its weapons ready for one final strike. The ground forces were waiting, and Naomi knew that this would be the decisive moment. The enemy stronghold was heavily fortified, but Naomi had a plan. All troops deploy. We hit them hard, we hit them fast. This is the end of the war. We take the stronghold now. The Valkyrie's troops, led by Naomi's orders, stormed the stronghold with precision. The battle was fierce, but with Naomi's leadership, the forces were able to break through and take control of the planet. The stronghold was theirs, and the enemy's resistance crumbled. As the dust settled and the battle came to a close, Naomi stood tall on the battlefield, looking over the scene. The fleet had won. The enemy had been defeated, and the planet was now under their control. It had been a hard-fought victory, but it was one that Naomi had earned, not just as a mechanic, but as a leader. The fleet returned to their base, and Naomi was greeted with cheers and applause from the crew. Torak, who had once doubted her, now stood by her side, his respect for her evident. The queen, too, acknowledged Naomi's role in the victory, and for the first time, Naomi felt a sense of acceptance among the fleet. But Naomi knew that the battle was never truly over. There would always be new challenges, new enemies, and new obstacles to overcome. But she was ready for whatever came next. The Valkyrie was ready, and humanity had proven that they could stand shoulder to shoulder with the greatest of the galaxy's species. As Naomi looked out at the stars, she knew that this victory was just the beginning. Humanity had carved its place in the universe, and she would continue to lead them into the future, one battle at a time. Naomi stood in the command center of the Valkyrie, her eyes scanning the vastness of space before her. The battle was over, and humanity had emerged victorious. The fleet had successfully defeated the enemy and taken control of their stronghold. Naomi's leadership had proven invaluable in the heat of the battle, but as she stood there, surrounded by the sounds of the ship systems humming back to life, she couldn't help but reflect on what this victory really meant. It wasn't just about the battle they had won. It was about the future of humanity among the stars. In one swift move, they had proven that they were no longer just a primitive species trying to catch up. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was strong, adaptable, and capable of achieving greatness. As the crew celebrated the victory, Naomi felt a mix of emotions. There was relief, of course. The war had been brutal, and countless lives had been lost. But there was also a deep sense of pride in what they had accomplished. Humanity had faced the unknown, and they had not just survived, they had thrived. Naomi had always been a problem solver. She had fixed things, repaired broken systems, and patched up ships. That was her job. But now she had done something far more significant. She had led the Valkyrie and its crew to victory. She had earned the trust of the fleet, the respect of the alien species, and most importantly, the recognition that humanity had a place in the galaxy. The reality of it all began to sink in as Naomi walked down the halls of the Valkyrie. The ship felt different now. It wasn't just a vessel of war, it was a symbol of humanity's strength. She had been part of something bigger than herself, something that would change the course of history. The alien engineers and crew who had once doubted her now looked at her with a newfound respect. Torak, the Zorath chief engineer, was one of the first to approach her after the battle. His large, imposing figure was a stark contrast to Naomi's smaller frame, but his eyes now held a sense of camaraderie that hadn't been there before. "You did it," Torak said, his voice gravelly but filled with respect. "You led us to victory. The Valkyrie would not be here without you." Naomi nodded, trying to hide the smile that crept onto her face. "We did it, Torak. It wasn't just me. It was all of us, humans and aliens, working together." Torak's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps there is more to your people than I realized. Your ingenuity, your ability to adapt, it is unmatched. Maybe we were wrong to doubt you." Naomi didn't respond right away. She had known all along that the key to humanity's success was their adaptability. While the aliens relied on their advanced technology and rigid traditions, humans had always found ways to bend and shape the world around them to their will. It was in their nature to improvise, to overcome the odds, and to find solutions where others saw only obstacles. As Naomi made her way through the ship, she couldn't help but think of how far she had come. She had started as a simple mechanic, a human among alien engineers who saw her as little more than a tool. But now, she was a leader. She had earned her place alongside the most powerful species in the galaxy, and she had proven that humanity was not something to be underestimated. The Valkyrie was still in orbit around the enemy's stronghold, now completely under their control. The crew was preparing for the final phase of the mission, establishing a permanent presence on the planet. It would take time to rebuild and secure the planet, but they had taken the first step. The enemy had been defeated, their stronghold shattered, and their fleet in retreat. Naomi met with Queen Malrath in the command center. The queen had remained mostly silent throughout the battle, but now, as the dust settled, it was clear that she had been impressed with Naomi's leadership. The queen, whose species had once looked down on humanity, now stood before Naomi, acknowledging her role in the fleet's success. "Captain Hayes," Queen Malrath began, her voice calm and measured, "I have watched you lead your people with strength and determination. You have earned more than just victory today, you have earned my respect." Naomi looked at the queen, her expression neutral. She had expected this moment, but it still felt surreal. "Thank you, your majesty, but this victory was not just mine. It was a team effort." "We fought together." The queen nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly as if considering something. "Yes, but you led them. You inspired them to believe in themselves, in something greater than their individual differences. That is what makes a leader." Naomi felt a warmth spread through her chest at the queen's words. She had never thought of herself as a leader. She had always been the one to fix things, to solve problems. But now, she realized that being a leader wasn't about having all the answers. It was about guiding others, motivating them to do their best, and showing them that even in the darkest of times, there was hope. "I didn't do it alone," Naomi replied. "I had help from everyone on the Valkyrie, humans and aliens alike. We all played a part." The queen smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but it was your leadership that brought them together. You have earned your place among us, Captain Hayes. The fleet has never seen a leader like you, and neither has humanity." Naomi's heart swelled with pride, but she knew that the battle was far from over. They had won a crucial victory, but there was still much work to be done. The enemy would regroup, and they would need to stay vigilant. Naomi wasn't going to let her guard down now. The future of humanity, and the entire fleet, depended on it. In the days that followed, Naomi continued to work with the alien engineers to strengthen the fleet's defenses and ensure that the Valkyrie remained operational. She coordinated with the ground forces, overseeing the establishment of a permanent base on the planet. The work was exhausting, but Naomi had never felt more alive. She had a purpose now, and she was determined to see it through. The fleet's victory over the enemy had sent a clear message to the galaxy. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. They had fought alongside the most powerful and advanced races in the universe, and they had proven that their ingenuity and adaptability were more than enough to face any challenge. As Naomi stood on the balcony of the Valkyrie, looking out over the planet they had just conquered, she realized that this was only the beginning. The Valkyrie was just one ship, one symbol of what humanity could achieve. There were still other threats out there, other challenges waiting for them in the vastness of space. But Naomi was ready for whatever came next. With the fleet's victory secured, Naomi knew that the real work had just begun. The future of humanity was uncertain, but she was determined to ensure that it was a future worth fighting for. She had already proven that humans could rise to any occasion, and she would continue to lead them into the unknown. The stars stretched out before her, and Naomi smiled. She had found her place in the galaxy, and humanity, with all its strength, resilience, and adaptability, had found its place as well.